My husband and I tried to have a child for 4 years, and when we finally succeeded, he said the child was not his. My name's Mia, I'm 31 now, and for the last 4 years, my life has been a cycle of hope and heartbreak. Garrett, my husband, he's 34, has been my rock through it all, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. We've been trying to conceive since our wedding night. I know people say not to stress over it, that it happens when it's meant to happen, but trust me, when you're on month 38 and all you have to show for it are 2 miscarriages and a chemical pregnancy, that line starts to feel like a punch in the gut. I went through everything. I mean everything. Blood tests, ultrasounds, HSG, hormone panels, even laparoscopy at one point because they thought maybe it was endometriosis. Turned out it wasn't. Unexplained infertility. That's what they called it. Like a shrug in diagnosis form. Meanwhile, I was popping prenatal vitamins that made me nauseous every morning, peeing on ovulation sticks 3 times a day, keeping a spreadsheet of basal body temperatures and cervical mucus. My life became a science experiment with no real control group. Garrett was there. He held me when I cried after every failed cycle. He came to the appointments. He took off work for every D/C. He was there. But looking back, I'm not sure if he was really present. It's like he played the part of the supportive husband without ever stepping off script. Sometimes I'd be sobbing in the bathroom after a negative test, and he'd just sit outside the door and repeat the same thing he always did. We'll make it. It's just not time yet. And for a while, I believed him. I had to believe someone. The worst was the second miscarriage. I was 11 weeks along. We'd already nicknamed the baby. I had bought a pair of tiny socks. Garrett had started browsing cribs online, half joking about making sure it was tech-savvy. And then, out of nowhere, I started bleeding. Not spotting. Bleeding. Like something out of a horror movie. We rushed to the ER. I was holding my stomach like that could somehow hold everything in. But it didn't. Nothing did. And when they told me there was no heartbeat, Garrett held my hand and said we'd try again. We always said we'd try again. That's the thing. When you're going through this kind of thing, it becomes your identity. I wasn't Mia anymore. I was trying to conceive Mia. My life revolved around luteal phases and progesterone levels. My calendar had little hearts marked on the days we had to have sex. It stopped being spontaneous. It was clinical. We'd be in the middle of it, and I'd be wondering if I was in the right position to help the sperm travel better. Garrett never complained. That's what I mean. He was always there. But I can't remember the last time he kissed me just to kiss me, not because it was ovulation day. I started hormone therapy about 1.5 years ago. Let me tell you, if you've never been on Clomid or Letrozole, you don't know what hormonal hell is. I cried because my toast fell on the floor once. I yelled at Garrett for breathing too loud. I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. And still, nothing. Every single month, I'd get that tiny bit of hope. My period would be a day late, and I'd think, this is it. And then it wouldn't be. I remember one night I started bleeding while we were watching a movie. Garrett paused the TV, looked at me, and said, we'll try again next month. Just like that. Like I'd just lost a bet, not another maybe baby. The first miscarriage had been earlier. About 6 weeks. That one blindsided me too, but people said it was common. So I brushed it off like I was supposed to. I didn't even let myself grieve properly. The chemical one was even earlier. Barely a line on the test before it disappeared. But I still counted them. Because you do. You count everything when you're trying. I remember once, during a particularly bad month, I was sitting on the bathroom floor, just numb. I had just gotten my period again. Garrett came in, knelt down next to me, and held me. And I wanted to ask him, really ask him, are you still in this? Do you still believe this is going to happen? But I didn't. Because I was terrified of the answer. I think he felt like asking that too. But neither of us said anything. We just sat there on the cold tile floor, pretending it was enough just to sit. And then, one day, I realized something. I realized I was measuring our entire relationship by how many times we could survive another disappointment. That's not love. That's endurance. And I don't know if Garrett noticed it, but I started pulling away. Just a little. I stopped marking the calendar. I skipped a day of vitamins here and there. I didn't cry after the next negative test. I just threw it away and made coffee. We haven't talked about next steps. IVF is expensive. Insurance doesn't cover it. We'd have to take out a loan. Garrett says we'll figure it out, but we haven't even filled out the paperwork. It's like we're both waiting for the other one to say it's okay to stop. But no one wants to be the one who gives up. So here I am, 31. No baby. No answers. And a husband who's always there. But I'm not sure if he's really here. That's all. I just needed to say it somewhere. When I finally saw the 2 stripes on that test, I couldn't breathe. I stared at it for so long that my eyes started watering. And at first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the line was just a trick of the light or one of those ghost lines people on forums always warn you about. But it was real. Solid. Dark. I double-checked it with 2 more tests from different brands. Then I drove straight to the clinic near our house and paid out of pocket for a blood test because I needed someone with a lab coat and a clipboard to tell me this wasn't just another false hope. The nurse called 2 days later, and her voice was warm, almost excited, as she said, "Congratulations, Mia. Your numbers look great." I think I said thank you, but I was already crying too hard to really register what was coming out of my mouth. It felt like my body had finally done something right, like maybe this time would be different, like all the waiting and the injections and the heartbreak hadn't been for nothing. I waited until Garrett got home that evening. I had this whole thing in my head, like maybe I'd light a candle or make a little card or something cheesy like tie the test to our dog's collar. But when he walked in, I just blurted it out. "I'm pregnant," I said, and my voice cracked in the middle like I still couldn't quite believe it myself. He didn't even look up right away. He was sitting at the kitchen counter with his phone in his hand, reading some thread about custom keycaps or something equally niche. When he finally registered what I'd said, he blinked a few times, looked at me, and said, "Okay." That was it. No smile. No hug. No running toward me like in the movies. Just that one flat word like I'd told him I'd picked up milk on the way home. And then he went right back to scrolling through his phone, completely unfazed. At first, I told myself it was shock. I even defended him to myself. I said he just needed time to process. That maybe it hadn't sunk in yet. That men react differently. That his brain just needed to catch up with his heart. But days passed, then a week, and nothing changed. He didn't touch my belly, not even as a joke. He didn't bring up names, didn't mention doctor appointments, didn't say anything about baby clothes or strollers or ultrasounds. I would sit next to him on the couch and bring up something like, "Do you think we should move the office to make room for the crib?" And he'd mumble something like, "We'll figure it out," before going back to whatever subreddit he was buried in. One night, I left one of the ultrasound appointment cards on his pillow so he wouldn't miss it. He showed up, sat through the whole thing, nodded when the tech pointed out the flicker of the heartbeat, and then said nothing on the drive home. Just silence, punctuated by the sound of him tapping on his phone. I try not to take it personally. I really did. I kept thinking maybe he was scared. Maybe he didn't want to jinx it. Maybe he didn't know how to be excited after everything we'd been through. But eventually, I stopped trying to guess. I just accepted that, for whatever reason, this life-changing moment that had cracked me open with joy barely registered with him. And I didn't know what to do with that. Garrett didn't ask about any of the doctor's appointments. Not once did he say, "When's the next checkup?" Or "How did it go?" Or even as simple, "Is everything okay?" It was like my pregnancy existed in a completely separate dimension from his life, like it was something happening in a movie he wasn't interested in watching. He never touched my stomach, not even when I started showing, not even when I guided his hand toward the tiny flutters I could feel for the first time. He let his fingers rest there for a moment, barely, then pulled away and said nothing. The whole thing felt clinical, like he was touching a stranger. He avoided any mention of the baby like it was a topic that made him uncomfortable, like discussing it was somehow taboo. If I brought it up over dinner or while we were lying in bed, he either changed the subject or stared at the ceiling in silence. I'd say something small, like how the baby book said our child was now the size of a peach, and he'd just blink slowly and go, "Huh," like I told him it might rain later. It wasn't indifference exactly. It was like absence, like the emotional equivalent of leaving the room while I was still talking. I started to feel like I was losing my mind, wondering if I was expecting too much. But then I'd remember all the times he used to hug me while I sobbed on the bathroom floor, how he'd promised, "When it happens, it'll be everything." But now that it was happening, it was like he didn't know how to be part of it. Or worse, like he didn't want to be. Sometimes, when I tried to break through the silence, when I asked him why he was acting so distant, he'd sigh and say things like, "What do you want me to say?" His voice would be flat, a little annoyed, like I was nagging him about the trash or the thermostat instead of trying to understand why he wasn't connecting to something that meant everything to me. And instead of continuing the conversation, he'd just get up, walk across the room, and sink into his gaming chair, headset already in hand before I could say anything else. It felt like I was carrying this baby alone, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, in every way that mattered. I tried to find an explanation for it all, because facing the truth felt too heavy. I told myself maybe he was afraid. Maybe he just didn't know how to express it. I thought maybe it was different for him, that the reality hadn't sunk in yet the way it had for me. Kelsey, my best friend since college, told me that some men don't really connect to the idea of fatherhood until the baby is actually here, that it becomes real for them only in the delivery room, when they're holding their child for the first time. I clung to that thought like it was a lifeline, even though a part of me knew I was just trying to soften the blow. I kept watching him, waiting for some sign, any sign, that he was warming up to the idea. A passing comment, a glance at the ultrasound photo on the fridge, something. But there was nothing. Just that same quiet detachment. His silence wasn't just passive anymore. It had weight, like a wall between us that grew higher with each passing day. And it wasn't just what he didn't say, it was everything else. The way he avoided looking at my belly when I changed clothes, how he never asked if I was feeling okay, how he stopped sleeping with his hand on my back the way he used to, like he was slowly retreating into himself and taking all of his warmth with him. The more I tried to believe that it was fear or uncertainty, the more his indifference began to feel like something else entirely. Something colder. Something that didn't have anything to do with nerves or confusion. His distance wasn't accidental. It was chosen. And I was starting to realize that I couldn't reach him, no matter how many ways I tried. When we were invited to Garrett's sister Shaylin's for dinner, I let myself hope, just a little, that maybe the atmosphere would help. I thought being around family, having something warm and familiar, might shake something loose in him. I spent more time getting ready than I had in weeks. I wore a deep green dress that finally hugged my bump in a way that made me feel seen instead of swollen. I curled my hair, put on a little makeup, and when I looked in the mirror, I actually felt beautiful. Not just pregnant, but whole. Like maybe I could still feel like myself in all of this. The car ride was quiet, but I didn't press him. I had told myself I wouldn't let his mood sink the evening before it even started. Maybe it would lift once we were there, once people were talking and laughing and he was reminded that we were still part of something bigger than the two of us. But the moment we stepped through Shaylin's front door, the evening veered off course. She looked at me, paused, and then said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, you finally look pregnant. I was beginning to think you were making it up." Her voice had that fake laugh undertone, the kind people use when they want their cruelty to pass as humor. My smile faltered, but I forced a laugh, even as I felt the heat creep up my chest and into my face. I looked over at Garrett, hoping, no, expecting, him to say something, to shut it down, to at least acknowledge that it wasn't okay. But he didn't even flinch. He just kept walking, past his sister, straight into the living room, and took a seat like he hadn't heard a thing. Not a glance in my direction, not a word in my defense. Just silence. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just alone at home. I was alone everywhere. During dinner, the conversation drifted to travel plans and dream vacations, the kind of easy, harmless chatter that usually floats around family tables. Someone mentioned Greece, someone else joked about hiking in Patagonia, and for a second I let myself forget how tense everything had been. But then Shaylin turned to me, smiling like she was doing me a favor, and said, "Well, you're not going anywhere with the baby." Her tone was light, teasing, but her eyes said something sharper. I opened my mouth to respond, not even sure what I was going to say, when Garrett jumped in with a laugh and said, "Or without the baby, who knows?" Everyone around the table cracked up like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all night, and I just sat there, staring at the plate in front of me. I clenched my fingers in my lap so tightly it hurt, trying to keep the flood in my throat from rising. The laughter echoed in my ears while I swallowed hard and smiled like someone had told me the weather was nice. A few minutes later, when the conversation turned toward names, someone's coworker had just had twins, and Shaylin was joking about what people were naming their kids these days. I offered one of the names I'd been thinking about. It was a soft, pretty name, one I'd been turning over in my head during quiet mornings, imagining how it would sound whispered into a crib or written on a backpack. I said it gently, hoping for just a flicker of engagement, some sign of interest from Garrett. Shaylin laughed as soon as the name left my mouth and said, "That sounds like a stripper name." She didn't even try to hide the sneer in her voice. I felt the table go quiet for a moment, the kind of pause that should have made someone step in, say something, shift the air. But Garrett didn't say a word. He didn't glance at me, didn't push back, didn't even offer the thin comfort of a polite laugh to defuse the cruelty. He just kept chewing, eyes on his plate, as if none of it had anything to do with him. And in that moment, the silence was louder than anything else in the room. And then Garrett said the line that split everything clean down the middle, like a blade to the chest, so fast and sharp I didn't even feel the full weight of it until a second later. He leaned back in his chair, shrugged, and with the same casual tone he used to talk about mechanical switches or grill temperatures, he said, "We don't even know if it's my baby yet. There are paternity tests." For a moment, no one moved. His mother's face went pale, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Shaylin let out a loud, barking laugh like it was the punchline to a joke she'd been waiting on for years. No one said a word to stop her. No one told him to take it back. No one looked at me. The air felt thick, like it had turned to glue around me, and the only sound I could hear was the dull, distant rush of blood in my ears. I stood up, my chair scraping across the hardwood, and all I could feel was the pressure in my chest, not anger, not sadness, just a hard, steady pressure like something had finally snapped into place. I looked him dead in the eye, and I said, calm and clear, "You're right. A child like that doesn't deserve a father like that." And then I turned around and walked out. I moved in with my cousin Jessica the same night I walked out of that dinner. She didn't ask for details. She just opened her door, helped me carry my overnight bag inside, made me tea, and let me sit in silence. I don't think I said a full sentence for the first 3 days. It was the kind of silence that comes when your body is still running on adrenaline, but your mind has already collapsed. Jessica never pushed. She just gave me space, and that was the first kindness I'd felt in months. A few days later, the boxes started arriving. One had a package of diapers, unopened, still with the price tag attached. Another had a folded crib mattress and a half-assembled frame. Tucked inside was a note, scribbled in Garrett's handwriting, barely 2 lines. "I miss you. Please don't shut me out." But I knew what it was. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't love. It was theater, a prop performance for whoever was watching, for his family maybe, for himself definitely. He was still trying to maintain the illusion that he was a man who had simply made a mistake, who was now trying to do the right thing. I didn't respond. I didn't open the other boxes. I told Jessica she could leave them in the hallway. I didn't want to see them. Then one evening, nearly 2 weeks after I'd left, he came in person. He knocked on Jessica's front door like we were still playing house, like he had every right to be standing there. Jessica answered, and I could hear him ask if he could have 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. She looked at me, and I didn't say anything. I just walked past her and out onto the porch. He looked tired, like he hadn't shaved or slept properly, and for a moment, that familiar ache pulled at me, the one that used to make me soften too quickly. But this time it stayed where it was. He said he was scared, that he didn't mean what he said, that it was just a bad joke, just words said in front of people. He kept saying, just, like it made it smaller, like it could be shrunk down to something forgivable if he said it softly enough. But then I found out the truth. He had already told his mom that we had worked things out, that I had forgiven him, that we were moving forward. Those were his exact words. Moving forward. While I was still trying to get out of bed in the morning without crying. And I don't even remember thinking. My hand just moved. The slap landed with a sound that echoed louder than anything he had said. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there. I didn't say another word. I didn't scream or cry or explain. I just walked past him, down the porch steps, and I left. My daughter Avi was born early on a foggy Tuesday morning. The kind of morning where the world feels quiet, like it's holding its breath. She came out with a full head of dark hair and a soft, steady cry that didn't sound angry or scared, just certain. I held her against my chest, skin to skin, and for the first time in years, I felt something in me settle. Like the noise had finally stopped. I didn't tell anyone from Garrett's side of the family. I didn't send photos, didn't make announcements, didn't give updates. There was no room for any of that. I didn't write his name on the birth certificate. I left that space blank and never looked back at it. Avi was mine. She was never a question or a debate or a performance. She was real, and she deserved a beginning that wasn't tied to someone who had spent so long pretending not to see her. We settled into something quiet and good. Nights were long and the days blurred together, but there was peace in it. And then, when Avi was 6 months old, I got a message that cracked everything open again. It was from Trevor, Garrett's old best friend. They hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered him. Always a little too blunt. Always the one calling Garrett out when no one else would. The message was short. Just a few lines. He said he knew what had happened. That he'd seen Garrett pull this kind of thing before. That years ago, Garrett had gotten another girl pregnant, someone he was casually seeing, and when she wanted to keep the baby, he pressured her into having an abortion. Told her he wasn't ready. Said it would ruin his life. Trevor said the girl had stopped talking to anyone who knew Garrett afterward. That she disappeared, and Garrett never mentioned her again. But then something changed. According to Trevor, ever since that incident, Garrett had started talking about children in this strange, possessive way. Not lovingly. Not like someone who wanted to raise a family, but like someone who saw fatherhood as a form of control. A way to prove something. To punish. To stake a claim. I sat there with my phone in my hand, reading the message over and over until the screen dimmed. And suddenly, it all made sense. The dead-eyed silence, the boxes, the performance in front of his family, the laugh at dinner, the paternity comment. None of it had been about Avi. None of it had even been about me. It had always been about him. About ownership. About power. About holding something over someone else so he could feel like he mattered. Everything fell into place. And I was more certain than ever that walking away hadn't just been the right thing. It had been the only thing. 6 years passed without a word from Garrett. Abby grew into a sharp, curious little girl with wild curls and a deep love for shiny rocks and muddy puddles. She liked to line up sticks in straight rows and called squirrels her backyard friends. She laughed with her whole body, and sometimes talked to her reflection in the bathtub like it was a separate person. She was whole, without ever knowing who he was. Then one day, I got an email from him. He said he had been in therapy, that he had done a lot of work, that he had changed. He didn't beg. He just asked if he could see her, once. No expectations, no pressure, just a moment. Against every instinct I had, I agreed. One meeting. In a public park. From a distance. No contact. No photos. No gifts. No introductions. Just a glimpse. We met on a mild afternoon in early spring. The air was still a little cool, and the trees hadn't fully bloomed, but the sky was clean and open. I told Avi we were going to feed the ducks and look for good skipping stones. She brought a plastic bucket and filled it with leaves and gravel and one oddly shaped rock she refused to let go of. She called it her potato friend and whispered to it like it was alive. Garrett was already sitting on a bench when we arrived. I saw him before he saw us. He looked thinner, older, and he wasn't hiding the gray in his hair. He watched us quietly, eyes fixed on Avi like he was trying to memorize her in one glance. She didn't notice him. She was too busy crouching by the water's edge, talking to the ducks, and tossing bits of bread like confetti. I stood behind her, arms crossed, every nerve in my body tight and braced. After 15 minutes, I walked over to where he was sitting. He didn't stand up. He just looked at me like he was waiting for something. Acknowledgement, maybe, or grace. But I didn't know him either. You've seen her, I said, my voice steady. You won't get anything more. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just looked down at his hands, empty and still. I turned and walked away. Avi slipped her little fingers into mine, still clutching the rock with the other hand. Potato friend is cold, she said thoughtfully, but I think she's happy. And I smiled and said, I think you're right. Behind us, Garrett stayed on that bench, motionless, alone, without anything to hold on to. Exactly as he deserved. Thanks for reading. I'm curious what you all think. If you were in my shoes, would you have let him see her at all? Do you think people like him really change? Or is it all just another layer of performance? Would love to hear your take.